Hello, everybody, and welcome to .NET Conf. We are so excited you're here from all over the world. This is one of our favorite days of the year. We had a lot of fun putting that keynote together. And now you get Damian and I for another 40 minutes or so to talk about .NET Aspire.
.NET Aspire.
Dive into all the new stuff. First and foremost, I know you all are super excited about downloading .NET 9. Me too. It will be out today, so keep your eye out. This is the link that it will pop up at when it is in the air, ready for your acquisition. And so, keynote this morning, if you saw it, great, awesome. We'll try not to repeat ourselves too much, but if you haven't or you're watching this pre-recorded, .NET Aspire is the way to develop your modern apps, observable, production ready, whatever it is, all the way from when you start the app to developing it and working on it locally, and then of course to deploying it to the cloud. And we GA'd in May.
May, that's right, Build.
At Build, yep. And we have been exploding. We've been watching the graphs, and they're very fun.
Exploding in a good way.
Good explosions,
yes.
Yeah. We're actually almost at 50,000 users since we GA'd, which is really cool. And it's definitely resonating with folks. And like we said in the keynote, we've had a lot of community contributions across .NET, but especially with Aspire. So we wanted to say thank you again. These are pictures of people who have actually contributed to Aspire over the last 6 months. There's been a ton.
I see a lot of people I know in there, actually.
Yeah. It's really cool. And it's just been really fun seeing how everyone's kind of rallied around this and how much it's resonated with folks. Because we didn't really know what we were building when we started.
I think it's true, and I can't think of anything else I've worked on .NET where that quickly we had so many people contributing like really substantial things very, very early on. So again, thank you.
Yeah. So Aspire, part of .NET. We love this slide. This is my favorite. We're kind of part of that ecosystem, right? So it's not a separate platform. It's not like a desktop or mobile app or something. Right. It's part of how you can develop a .NET app. And the reason that Aspire kind of exists is because we knew that all of your apps needed stuff to be in the modern world. They needed to be observable. They needed to be resilient to things. They needed to scale. Black Friday's coming up in the US. That's the day that all the APIs are going to get overloaded for shopping. And if it doesn't scale, things are bad. And of course, managing them when you can't go plug like a USB stick into a server room anymore. These are all the kinds of things that we've been trying to give you tools for in .NET in the box. And we've been doing a lot of this over the past many releases, right? Not just .NET 9. But one thing we haven't been doing for you is turning these things on necessarily. Or giving you our opinion on how they should be used by default. And on top of all of this, when you're working on apps that are in the cloud, there's other stuff, right? You have databases and messaging and queues. And
that's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff. This is the cloud native landscape, as they call it, from the Cloud Native Foundation. There's just a lot from, everything. And getting all these things to run together, all your different projects across all your different teams, and we're in this hybrid world now. We knew it was really hard, and we didn't know what we were doing. So we had to figure it out, and then we figured, hey, let's make this useful for everybody.
That's true. Like we have a lot of teams at Microsoft who obviously build highly scalable, highly observable apps, and we wanted to be able to take some of those learnings and roll them into something that we can give to you to make it easier for you to do it. So that's part of what Aspire is.
Exactly. So if someone asks you, what actually is Aspire, which we hear all the time, what is it? It's really just a set of tools, templates, and packages for building production-ready apps. That's all it is. And these 4 kind of pillar sections are the way that we like to think about it. I've heard 3, I've heard 7. You can kind of split it up, but this is the way that we try to think about it. We have this streamlined inner loop. It's a C#-based app host experience where you can orchestrate everything locally, right? You can connect things. There's service discovery. There's, environment variable injection, all these things. And then locally, when you run your app, there's a developer dashboard that reflects everything in your app host and also shows you some telemetry, stuff that's actually been built into .NET for a long time that we just wire up for you. And then as you want to expand it, you can plug and play with more of our integrations, which are really just pre-configured NuGets of existing packages with some glue. Right? And then if you want to, you can package all of this up, generate a manifest using some of our tooling, and deploy that to the cloud, and then have the same dashboard experience standalone in Azure in production, or in your staging environment, or wherever you want to deploy this to. And so there are a lot of pieces of Aspire. It's not just one thing. We've had a hard time figuring out the sentence for it. So we're getting there. But the best way to understand it is probably to see it.
Right.
And so we are actually going to give Damian some time to show you how to put Aspire into an app.
Right. Let's do it.
Let's do it. We're going to flip over to, you on your PC today?
You on my PC today? I'm in VS Code today. So one of the new things, this talk is about what's new in Aspire.
That's true.
And one of the new things since we announced Aspire earlier this year is that we have better VS Code support now.
Yeah.
And it's not that you couldn't do this stuff in VS Code before, it's just that you had to do things a little manually.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start out by showing you how easy it is to add Aspire to a quote-unquote existing app, which doesn't exist yet. I'm going to create it, and then we're going to add Aspire to it.
Wonderful.
So I'm going to go ahead and create myself a new app. So I'm going to go .NET New Project. I'm going to just create a Blazor web app. We'll do that up here. I'll choose that. I'm going to put it in this folder that I already have. For .NET Conf today, we'll call it Blazor app. And I'll say, yeah, go ahead and create that project. So let's get our project going initially, which if you're a .NET developer, you'll be very familiar with this idea. And now I want to add Aspire to this existing project or solution. And just quickly to show you, this is a normal Blazor app. There's nothing special about this at all. So far, it is just a Blazor app. It is nothing more than that. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add Aspire to this. So we'll just let this cook for a minute. Looks like it's happy now. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring up the command palette and I'm going to type Aspire. And you can see now it says .NET add .NET Aspire orchestration preview. So this is our preview tooling for kind of streamlining getting Aspire running in your applications. So I'm going to say, yes, go ahead and do that. I want to add it to my Blazor app. If I had more than one app, it would list them there and I could choose which ones of the projects I wanted to add it to. And then saying, okay, we need to name a new project that we're going to add to your solution here. It's called the app host project. And by default, we're just going to call it app host and I'm happy with that. The second one that we're going to add is this concept of a service defaults project. Maddy was talking about giving you a starting point, an opinion, a place to start that turns things on. That's what service defaults is about. It's just a class library that turns stuff on that's going to be referenced by the rest of your app projects. So now that I've done that, we can see things starting to happen over here in my file explorer. So I've got that app host folder has shown up, which has my app host project in it, and this service defaults project has shown up that has my service defaults extension methods in it. Because I'm in VS Code, I can obviously show the Solution Explorer as well, which is part of C# Dev Kit. And so let's go and have a little bit of look about what I need to do just to finish wiring this up. I've got my new projects. I'm going to go into this app host project, which is kind of the root, it's the foundation of my Aspire world. So I need to add my project to the app host so that Aspire knows about it. Yeah. So I'm going to do that here using C# because we just use C# to describe our full Aspire sort of solution here. So I'm going to say add project, and then we generate you a nice class that represents all the projects in your solution. So I'm going to add my Blazor app, and then I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to call this my web app, and that's done. So now this distributed application builder, or this app model that represents my larger application, knows about this project. Lastly, I'm going to go over to the Blazor app, and this is the kind of the first thing I'm going to change. You can see that the tooling added a reference to that service defaults project for me. So I'm going to go into the program CS, and I'm going to call a couple of methods that wires up my existing app into those Aspire defaults, into those opinions that we talked about. So I'm going to say builder, and I'm going to say add service defaults. That's a method that lives in my service defaults project. So it didn't come from a package, it's just part of the template, and it's code that I can change over time as the needs of my application dictate. And then I'm going to come down to the end, I'm going to say map default endpoints. And this is kind of like the two-phase dance that you do in ASP.NET Core apps, right? You set up services at the top and configuration, and then you configure middleware and configure endpoints. So that's what I'm doing down here. Okay, so now that I've done that, that's all I've had to do to add Aspire. So if I go back to my app host project and I launch this now, we're going to see the next major kind of pillar that you talked about, which is what happens when I launch an Aspire application during local development. One of the main things that Aspire is all about is improving the local development story for these types of distributed applications. So the Aspire dashboard shows up as part of launching my application. Now, it's still running my Blazor app. You can see here my Blazor app is listed as a resource on the resources page. It says that it's running, and the endpoint or the URL for that is available. So I can click on that, and look, there's my Blazor application. I can navigate around. It got launched by the Aspire app host. If you've seen Aspire already, and this is, you might be looking at the dashboard going, well, there's some new things here since we launched earlier in the year. Don't worry, we'll get to look at those in just a minute. But just as a quick rundown, other things on the dashboard, I can see console logs of all the resources that are being orchestrated by this. So here they are, just the one in this case. I can see structured logs. So any logs that are coming out via the ASP.NET Core structured logging system, they show up here in rows. And because they're structured, I can do filtering and I can click on them and see all the details associated with each of those, which is nice. We also get proper traces. So this is fed or driven by OpenTelemetry, which is one of the things that Aspire opens or wires up by default. And so I can click in here and I can see requests that were made inside this application, click on the details or the span as this is called, and get all that rich information about what's going on. And then lastly, the other aspect that OpenTelemetry adds for us are metrics. So if you've ever used any type of metrics reporting or telemetry reporting system, you're probably used to seeing graphs and P50, P90 times. That's exactly the type of thing that's being shown here, but it's doing it for my application. Okay, so this is a very simple application. I'm going to very quickly switch over to maybe a slightly more complicated application.
Okay.
So we saw how easy it was to add, but what if I was to run something that was a little bigger? So here's an Aspire shop, which is just another Aspire app. It's actually in our samples repo, which we'll have a little bit of a look at later. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to run the app host project from this Aspire shop. And we're going to see the dashboard show up, but now there's a lot more stuff going on because this app is more complicated, it's more mature, it has more code and more projects in it. And you might notice there are some other things like, oh, I've got containers running in here now. So yeah, Aspire, you can also add things like containers alongside projects, and then Aspire does the job of orchestrating, starting all those things up together. So my front end is down here, that's the last project down here, and I can click on front end, or I can click on the URL. And there's my front end running. This is the Aspire Shop sample, like I said, and it's showing things and I can click around and do stuff. That's great. So now if I go over to traces, you can see a little bit more information because there's more stuff going on in this application. If I look at this request, you can see lots more spans. Now you can really see the power of OpenTelemetry and visualizing trace information directly in this developer dashboard. It was a dashboard designed for developers showing the information that you care about. So that was like a really whirlwind introduction to adding stuff to Aspire.
We thought we were going to fit that all in the 7 minutes of the keynote originally.
I know, right?
And then we kind of took that back. So we're going to go back to the slides for a little bit because I want to show you some of the things that are new. And then I have Damian with all of his samples and magic ready to demo these things.
Okay.
So first and foremost, back to my machine. Boop, 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 boop. Doot, doot. I'm waiting.
There we go.
There we go. Sorry. Yeah, with the inner loop stuff, I think one of the other things that has kind of existed in .NET that a lot of people probably know about but don't know the power of is health checks. In Aspire, we've just been expanding on the concept of health checks, and in your service defaults, kind of giving you more ways to tweak them. And then you can leverage those to actually create a bit of like a dependency chain with your resources in your containers. This was probably the #1 feature request we had when we launched in May, which was I need to wait for something to start up before I start something else up.
Right.
And so now you can do it with the default health checks. You can write your own health checks. You can wait for your database to start up. The original eShop app we showed last year in the keynote, when we ran it with Aspire, it had a bunch of errors because it was waiting for RabbitMQ to turn on.
Right.
We just were like, yeah, that's okay.
It's fine.
Don't worry.
Resilient. It kept working.
It kept working.
But people were like, but I don't want to see the errors just during local development.
Exactly.
Like, just wait for it to start.
Just wait. And another thing we added was the lifetime kind of concept for containers, right? So that was a huge feature request as well. When you stop running the app host, your containers don't have to die. You can set them to continue running. Docker or Podman or whatever you're using under the hood will keep that container alive. So something that takes 30 seconds to start up, you only have to do that the first time you F5. You don't have to do that every time. In the dashboard, we kind of took a lot of that concept and integrated it into some good UI for stopping and restarting. Individual pieces, which was a lot harder than we made it seem to be. We were like, yeah, just stop the project and restart it.
How hard could it be?
It was hard. And so we gave you kind of this ability to, now that you have things waiting for or running, or maybe you change some part of one container in the middle of running the app host, instead of having to tear everything down and build it back up, you can just stop and restart things from the actual dashboard.
Nice.
And those are actually an API we created that's totally extensible. So we implemented them for you here with stopping and restarting. But there's this broader concept that we want to show you called custom commands that's new in Aspire 9, where you can actually build your own actions in the dashboard.
That's cool.
So we're going to go back to Damian.
Okay.
We're
Back to the code.
Back to the code.
Back to the code. Okay, so just to underline some of the points that Maddy just made. So if we look at the code here for that Aspire shop sample, you can see some of the things being used that she mentioned. So if I just zoom into the code a little bit, you'll see up the top here on line 5 that I'm setting the lifetime of this Postgres container to be persistent, because my database containers take more than a couple of seconds to start. Like even if I create a data volume and I make sure that the data stays around in between runs, the container itself still takes a little while to start. So now I can just say, hey, the lifetime of this container is persistent. It'll keep running in between my debug launches and things like that. If I scroll down, you'll also see an example of a custom health check. So here I've added a health check to the DB manager, and I say, hey, look, this one has a health check at /health, which is another project. And now I can say, hey, I want you to wait for this other thing, and the health check will be considered if anyone is waiting on me. Right? That's kind of a lot to unpack. So just very quickly, right? Here's my project. This one's called Catalog DB Manager. It adds a health check that pings the /health endpoint on this project. And then if I look at this variable, I can see, oh, look, this other one is waiting for that down on line 27. The catalog service is waiting for the Catalog DB Manager. Well, how does it know when to wait until? Well, in this case, it's going to wait until this health check returns a healthy result, and then it will go on starting up the catalog service. So that's how easy something like that is. But you also mentioned custom commands, which is a really, really cool thing. So over here on the right-hand side, we'll see the dashboard now has a column called actions. Okay, so some of the actions included stop and start. That's the type of thing that that Maddy's already mentioned. But you can create your own actions. If I kind of open up this one here, you can see that I've created an action called reset database. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, often during local development, you might have test data. You run the app, you put stuff in, and then you go, yeah, it works. And then you want to reset everything back to the initial state. Or perhaps you want to change the seed data, or you change the model, and then you run with that for a bit, and then you go, this is not what I want, and you undo that, you revert that, but your database is still what it was because you made it persistent, you don't want to have to recreate it. Wouldn't it be great if there was just a little command that I could create and run whenever I want to as a developer? So you need to think of the dashboard not just as a mechanism for showing you information. It's almost like a harness that hosts your own custom functionality. Now today you might have a bunch of PowerShell or shell scripts that you use as a developer to do things like this. We're saying, why not stick them in the dashboard? Write C# code, and then you can just invoke them from here. So what does one of these look like? Let me show you the code for this quickly. So over here, you can see I've created this with HTTPS command. This is a method that I wrote, and it says, hey, this is a command that's going to be available on this project in the dashboard. What it's going to do is it's going to hit an endpoint on this project called resetDB. Sounds really frightening, but I'll show you why it's not too frightening. And then you can set the custom icon. So the icon comes from the Fluent UI library, which is what we're using for the dashboard. So what does resetDB on this project do? So if I go and find that one, here it is. So this is the program main of the Catalog DB Manager. And you can see I'm just saying, hey, if I'm in development, only if I'm in development, obviously, go ahead and map a new endpoint using minimal APIs called resetDB, and it's literally just saying, delete the database and then run database initialization again. It's as simple as that. So this code, this command code, when I invoke it over here, is just going to run in the app host. It's code that I wrote, it's in the app host project, so it only works during local development. So anything that you think is a command that would be useful for you during local development, you can now write C# code, add it as a command using the Aspire extensibility, and then very easily invoke it from the dashboard. How cool is that?
It's so cool. Yeah. It's so cool. The best demo, though, is, I'm sorry, James Newton King's Rickroll.
Oh, yes.
It's better than
I was kind of partial to his beep demo.
Oh, the beep was good too.
So what we're referring to is James, who was the developer who did these, who implemented custom commands. I think he has a couple of posts where on public where he was like, oh, look, I created a command that when you hit it in the dashboard, it beeps your computer 100 times or opens YouTube to Rickroll you. So,
I mean, it's just code.
It's just code. You can make it do whatever you like.
And you can see everything that Damian just showed. If we switch back to the slides in the Aspire samples repo, so github.com/.net Aspire samples. We keep those maintained. The team maintains them. We put stuff up there as we write them. So they're always changing and adding new things. One of the other things in that sample, I believe that sample or a similar sample that's up there in that repo, is 2 ways to actually integrate not just .NET, but Python. So we have Node.js support as well. Python's become a hot topic because of AI, and I know Maria and Steve talked about that in the keynote. One thing that we saw a lot of people doing was creating containers to run Python in. In this case, it's like an inference model, right? So something to maybe tell you what the top items are in the database or vice, whatever. And so we've actually created an integration that's in preview now to give you our opinion of what the defaults of that should be.
Right.
And so that's this add Python app method. You'll notice in the larger one, we're using a API called add Docker file, which is possible to use for anything that you could put a Docker file into, basically.
Right. So this was also an addition after we initially announced Aspire earlier this year. This came in like 8.1 or 8.2.
Yeah.
And so we know a lot of people use Docker as a way, or containers in general, as a way to do local development, not just run in production. And so you could choose here. You could say, well, I'm happy having the required dependencies installed on my developer machine, whether it's Node or Python or some other type of stack. And so there's a hosting integration specifically to integrate that. Or you could say, no, it's better if I just use Docker or containers for those things, and I have a Docker file. And then you can just write the code, as you see on the screen here, to point your app host at that Docker file. And then when I launch the app host, my .NET projects launch, and this container will get launched as well, built and launched. So it's very, very flexible.
It's there's a lot of settings. So, and then so what this is an integration, right? And so we've said this word a few times now. Let's actually try to explain it as best as we can.
Right.
Aspire has integrations, this concept of integrations. They used to be called components for our early adopters, and then we heard from a lot of people that components is used too much. So we picked a slightly less used word. That kind of works.
I think it's more descriptive too.
It's more descriptive. Yeah. And the way that integrations work, and imagine this is your Aspire project, right? You have your app host, and it talks to your .NET projects and all your executables and containers, whether that's a Python app or a database or whatever it is. And in your app host, in that builder, that apphost.cs file, you can leverage hosting integrations. And that's something like add Docker file or add Python app or add Postgres or add, I don't know, we got a bunch of stuff in that.
Right.
Yeah. And those are, on the hosting side, they're aspire.hosting.something. And those glue up basically our technology with those technologies and help it create that Docker container or whatever it is to turn it on. All of these things, again, are flexible. You can always bump out and just do a custom Docker file if you want or whatever it is. But that's the hosting side in the apphost.cs file project, all that. A lot of integrations, I almost said components. I almost said it. I know, we have a swear jar. I've donated most of my salary this year to it. A lot of these integrations have like a counterpart or a partner integration on the client side. And those are things that you can actually plug into your .NET projects. We took a lot of popular packages and we do some sane defaults, if you will, or just our opinion of what a good default is. But it's really just glue to the existing package under the hood. You'll notice all of our client integrations reference the NuGet for the actual way that you would do MySQL, or Postgres, or whatever it is.
Or like if it's Redis, for example, so the hosting integration will add a Redis container instance, but the client integration will reference stackexchange.redis, which is the .NET Redis client library that most people use.
Right.
Client library, hence client integration, because client integrations typically glue, as you said, client libraries into those Aspire defaults. So they add health checks and they turn on telemetry with OpenTelemetry. They make sure it's resilient, so they do retries and things like that if necessary. And they also set them up so you can change settings from configuration. So the ASP.NET Core configuration system, whether it's from a JSON file or an environment variable, which you mentioned before, we make sure the client integrations are set up so that that stuff flows through seamlessly.
Right. Yeah, and so it really is just kind of this plug and play, do what you will with it, very custom, very code first, right, extensible. We try not to put anything in a box so that you couldn't break out of it. We didn't want to rebuild all of the integrations that we have in Aspire as separate, things that we're maintaining. So we just put a little glue on top, put a little layer. These are, I think, almost all of the integrations we have in the box today in Aspire. And Aspire is open source, as I'm sure many of you know, so you can actually go see how we implemented a lot of these in our repo, which is cool, because if you want to build your own integration, you could.
Please do.
Please do.
Right.
And then you can contribute said integration to our new Aspire Community Toolkit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So we're not going to personally maintain white glove every integration on the planet from
Yes.
now on? Oh.
Yes, we're not going to make poor Eric on our engineering team single-handedly learn every single cloud resource on the planet.
Right, right. So that's a very good point. We could go, if we think back to the slide you showed before of like the cloud landscape, again, we don't want, we're not going to, as the .NET Aspire team, own every integration for everything on the planet.
We're not the experts in it.
We're not the experts. We don't own the client library. What we really want is to foster an ecosystem of integrations that plug into .NET and plug into specifically Aspire. And so, the Community Toolkit is a place now where you can go, if there's one you're passionate about and you're committed to maintaining, this is the place to put it. And the best part is they show up next to the integrations that we do maintain, the ones from the previous slide, they show up in the same place. They're on NuGet.org. They show up in the Visual Studio Package Manager gallery when you say, add Aspire package, right? So they'll show up as Community Toolkit contributions, but they will still show up as Aspire integrations.
Right. So it's a kind of a level of like curation that we're still providing. We're saying, this is a community package. This all the community toolkits. This is a model that exists. We didn't make this up.
Right.
It's very popular in .NET MAUI. The MVVM toolkit is huge. It's a .NET Foundation project. It's community contributed, community run. We have some folks on our team who are involved with it because they care about it. But we're giving you this visibility without the crazy barrier to entry and requirement of what we would think would be a core component to put in Aspire.
Right. And it's clear that you said that there are people on the team involved in the sense that we kind of set the standard. Like we wrote the doc and said, hey, if you're going to call yourself an Aspire integration, you should do these 6 or 7 things. And so, as you said, this is a level of curation. So rather than all of NuGet.org, which might be a little daunting to go and find the thing that you want, now you've got sort of the first party, the ones that we built, then you've got the community toolkit.
Right. And it's awesome. And the GitHub repo's up. It's there.
It's there right now.
So you can go look. I looked last night and Go had popped up.
Okay.
I was like, when did we add Go in the hosting as a hosting integration? Now you can start Go apps.
I'm glad we have Copilot to help me write Go because I don't know how to write Go.
Same. And of course, we have other partners that are have their own sets of integrations. And AWS is a good example of this. That you can join Norm and Scott Hunter's talk on Thursday, where they'll talk a little bit more about how the clouds are building their own integrations. In this case, AWS just launched their .NET Aspire repo, where they're maintaining all of their code.
Right.
And so for kind of these broad companies, I guess, that don't want to put things in a toolkit, but don't want to put things in our repo and want to own their own code, we have this new kind of ring of curation, and they pop up in that list as well.
Yeah, this is an interesting story because the AWS originally contributed this code to our repo while we were developing Aspire. And then when we got to this level of maturity, they were like, okay, we want our own destiny in our own hands now.
Yes.
And we kind of handed the code back to them last week.
Yeah,
so.
it's been very fun.
Yeah.
And of course, we have about 8 zillion Azure components. Integrations. No, I did it.
Oh.
I just said components.
$10, you're buying drinks tonight.
Oh, no. We have about 8 zillion Azure integrations contributed by us or by the Azure team. The newest one that we mentioned in the keynote is the Azure Functions integration. We do not have time to demo it.
Nope.
Sorry. I know a lot of you are excited for that, but that's okay because Safia Abdallah and Matthew Henderson have a whole talk on it tomorrow morning Pacific time. So they will show you, they are the people who built it, some of the people who built it, so they will show you how it works. The important thing to know is that right now it's really about running that function locally.
Yep.
The deployment stuff is going to kind of flush out over time.
Right.
And deployment is the final pillar.
Okay.
Oh, whatever you want to call it.
Notice that we've talked for 34 minutes and not talked about deployment.
Right.
So I want you to draw a line here in your head and go, all the value that we've just talked about in Aspire, all the features, you can use that right now and you can ignore everything we're about to talk about.
Yeah.
Because we know you're probably already deploying your apps.
Yep.
We're not trying to sell you a new deployment strategy.
Yep.
But there might be some advantages and we are working towards a vision of how we could improve this story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing we've heard from all of our customers is once your deployment works, you don't touch it.
Yes.
If it works, it works. Deployments are scary. A lot of you have people who are actual DevOps people, right? Like the developers aren't in charge of the deployment. And so you have people who know how to do deployment, not me, making those choices for you, right? But we also wanted to kind of expand on our idea of opinionated and really because this is for apps that will run in the cloud, we felt it would be weird to not have a way to get them to the cloud.
A way to get them there and to do it easily.
Easily, yeah. And so we've been working particularly with the Azure Dev CLI AZD, and on a way to kind of do a simple, opinionated deployment for you. And we've also wired that up through Visual Studio for you. So you can right-click publish.
What do we call this? The easy button. Who says that?
No, we're not supposed to say that.
Not supposed to say that.
We're not supposed to say
not
that.
the easy button.
The magic button.
The magic button?
The magic
Some
wand?
people don't like magic. The clowns are
The
scary.
cool button?
I don't know how I got to clowns are scary from
Clowns?
magic.
From magic?
Yeah, I know.
Vampire? The cool button?
The cool button.
Perhaps?
I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what we do is we deploy things to Azure Container Apps, which is kind of a more, opinionated, boxed up version of Azure Kubernetes service, where there is scaling, but you don't have to learn Kubernetes.
So it's like Kubernetes is there, but you don't have to be exposed to it.
Right.
So give me all the features and give me that as a platform, so I can deploy my stuff into it, but I don't have to manage the cluster.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's a very good fit for the type of apps that we think Aspire is particularly well suited for.
Right.
Once you get to a certain level of maturity, if you're trying to solve a certain set of problems.
Yeah. And this is also a great option for people who want a separate staging environment.
Right.
So if you want to deploy your app in staging and you don't want to do all of the CI/CD you have, this is a really good option. And so when we shipped the original ACA support, we just said, okay, just take everything in the manifest and push it up there.
Right.
And then people were like, hey, I want to change the name of my container. And we were like, oh, you can't
You can't do that. We're so opinied.
We're
you can
so
change
opinionated.
nothing.
Yes.
Nothing at all.
And so we spent a lot of time
Yep.
with folks on the Azure team and, of course, our team, trying to figure out what those things that you need to change are and exposing them in this new API, publish as Azure Container App. So in this case, you can see we're giving it a custom domain and certificate, and then things like scale to 0, scale
Nice.
to as many as you want. And this just is kind of abstracting bicep in a way.
It is. It's literally doing that. And it's just an extension of what we were talking about before. You can use C# to express the model of your wider distributed application. And now it doesn't just stop at the code in your repo. It goes all the way through to where you're deploying to.
Right.
So in this case, we're showing, this is effectively an Azure publishing integration. I just coined that, literally, right now.
Publishing integration.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is effectively an Azure publishing integration for Azure Container Apps. And so you can now write C# to describe your infrastructure, where you're going to land. So infrastructure as code is a thing. Not in any way have we invented that, but you can start to see now the building blocks of how we're going to build this much smoother. How do I glue not only client libraries, but where I land into the C# that describes my application. So this is the beginning of that.
Yeah, deployment is definitely, like Damian said, you don't have to touch this.
Nope.
If you don't want to, you can synthesize or reflect the ports and everything in your app host your own way.
Yep.
It's totally flexible. But if you're someone like me who is terrified of doing deployment, and you don't have a CI/CD team to do it for you, this is a really good starting point.
It's also a great way to get prototypes up and going, like dev tests.
yes.
I've got an idea, I put it together quickly, I want to get it up and running very quickly in ACA. AZD init, AZD up, and then I can AZD down when I don't want it anymore, and then it's gone.
I need to remember to do AZD down because I was told last month I was the most expensive employee in our org.
That just means you have impact.
Oh. Very good. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you one more time, .NET 9 will be out soon, imminently. This is the link for it, but we also have a bunch of links for Aspire stuff and more talks at .NET Conf. I could only fit 4 on this slide template for the talks, so there's a bunch more than this.
Are you saying people should watch out for these 4 over anyone else?
No, all of them.
Oh, okay.
All of them.
Go. Watch
but
all
these
the
are the
talks.
4 that I picked because we mentioned them today.
Fair enough.
So functions tomorrow. Of course, aspirations for Aspire with Fowler, which none of us know what he's going to say.
That's kind of Fowler uncut.
Yeah, it's like Fowler unplugged situation.
No chaperone. He's just going to be in here promising the world. For the rest. Yep.
And then the community toolkit deep dive with David Pine and Aaron Powell, who are 2 of the folks from our team that have been really invested in it. Aaron's kind of done all the legwork to spin it up, which is cool. And David Pine writes all of our docs.
David Pine is the legend who writes
The
all of our
legend?
docs. Yes.
And then, of course, like I mentioned, the Aspire AWS multi-cloud kind of talk on Thursday. And so then, we're open source. Talk to us on GitHub. We're also all over the socials now. I'm on Blue Sky. That's the thing.
I'm also on Blue Sky.
I'm also on Threads. I don't use it as much.
Yeah. I just get alerts from Threads and then I never read them. We also have a Discord channel
Discord.
on the .NET something.
Yes,
Discord?
aka.ms/.net-discord.
There it is.
That is a really good place, especially if you're building a custom integration or you're doing something really niche and you're breaking Aspire for funsies.
Right.
That's a good place to debug those
The secret
things.
is if you want white glove service from David Fowler, hang out in the Discord and complain about your problems, and he'll probably help you fix them.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. And then, of course, just like, GitHub issues, all these things, the normal things. Reddit, we are considering hosting a Reddit AMA after David's session tomorrow. So if that's something that's interesting to you,
Nice.
let us know on the internet in the next 24 hours or so, and we will set that up. Because we want to hear what's next. Aspire ships whenever we're ready.
Regularly.
Regularly.
Yes.
Not on that .NET 8.9 cycle yearly. We ship, much more incrementally than that. We had 2 releases before 9 since our GA in May. And that also means that Aspire works with .NET 8 as well as .NET 9.
Oh, huge point.
Because it's a library that works that we just, we multi-targeted.
That's right.
So we have a lot of stuff that we can do next and do it soon. And we're excited.
Yeah.
So, but we need to hear it from you. So
yeah.
thank you all so much